Welcome to Forum 360, a program on local issues with a global view. My name is Pat Simons, and I will be the host for today's program. We are talking about Ohio's charter schools with perspective from League of Women Voters. I myself am a Hudson League member, and I have been very interested in learning more about this committee's work. It is my pleasure to introduce two Hudson League members, Dr. Mimi Becker, who is a longtime member of League. She is also a current board director on the Hudson League. She is a former Portage League president and has served on the Ohio League board. And Bev Dorson, also longtime member. She is a current voter service chair and has been a president of the Hudson League and been on the Ohio League board. Welcome to the program today. This is a very big discussion, so we're going to dive right in. Why is League of Women Voters weighing in on charter schools? I thought all you did was voter service type things, like register voters.
No, the League studies issues of concern and arrives at positions on those issues and then acts. And the League is actually originally weighed in on charter school related issues in 1994. So this has been a long time concern of Leagues. We've been concerned about constitutionality, accountability, quality education, and a range of other things, particularly related to the public interest in funding these schools. And so the reason we're re-upping our interest and activity in this arena is because of audits that have been accomplished by the state auditor, by the Board of Education and Ohio Department of Education, and also because of investigative journalism on behalf of the Beacon Journal and the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which have brought concerns to the surface, along with our own homework. And so we are concerned about how the charter schools operate accountably in the public interest, educating our students for the challenges of the 21st century.
So you are politically active, but are you partisan at all, or are you nonpartisan?
The League never supports candidates or parties. It does support or oppose issues, both those on the ballot and those arising at community, state, or national levels, because the League has a presence in all three of those levels.
So you're very politically active.
Yes.
But you also are very strong in educating the public.
Correct. And one of the things that we have discovered in our investigation to date is that the public is very ill-informed about what charter schools are and how they differ from traditional public or common schools, as the Ohio Constitution calls them.
But the League's work in public education is not new.
No, the League has been interested in public education forever, from its beginning, because if you don't have informed voters who understand the issues that they're being asked to weigh in on and the competency of candidates to deal with them, democracy is ill-served.
Now, most Ohioans are very familiar with their local public school district. They know how they operate. Mm-hmm. They elect their local board of education. They also raise funds through taxes. Mm-hmm. So how do charter schools differ from traditional public schools?
Well, charter schools under Ohio law are called community public schools, and that can be confusing. They can be for profit, or they can be nonprofit. They are enabled by our Ohio Constitution, and they are designed to serve local cities and school districts. However, there is no mandate for charters not to be geographically specific. So they can be a systems of schools under a for-profit management. They're governed by state law under the Ohio Constitution, and Federal and state laws also refer to them as public, and so when we say the public school is not being served because of the charters, we have to be careful because they are called community public schools according to the laws that have been made for them. Supposedly, they must meet the same standards as public schools. However, this has not been the case from our study. The Ohio Charter School Law was passed to create more innovation, provide public educational options in the urban 8 schools in the state. And those are like Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland, are some of them, Toledo. I won't name them all. And they were to give families a choice and quality outside of boundaries of the city. The urban 8 were not performing that well when the law was passed in '97, and so this was thought to be a solution to the problem, possibly.
So that was about 20 years or so ago that this was
Yes.
brought forward?
Yes.
So they were not redefined, there's not a change in the Ohio Constitution to accommodate these schools?
No.
They are under the common system of schools as it's written in the Constitution?
Right.
So
No.
when, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, they are not part of the common system. The reason they are called public schools is the result of a Supreme Court decision, that was a 4-3 decision, that said that they could be consistent with the intent of the Constitution, but the Constitution specifically says that the public schools, and it calls them common public schools, have to be controlled by locally elected boards of education and enabled through the laws passed by the legislature. And then they specified in Article 4 of the Constitution that there would be a state board of education accountable to the legislature, but they never said what powers it had or hadn't. So the decision said, yes, they are public schools because they're being supported by public money, but, so there were some caveats to the decision that related to the accountability stuff.
So they've been adapted?
They have been adapted,
And they
it's-
use terms like operator and sponsor. What do those terms mean, and who provides those services?
well, okay,
The charter school operators are the entities empowered by the Ohio Charter to operate and manage K through 12 schools. Again, they are either nonprofit entities or privately held for-profit corporations. They may focus on a single school or schools scattered across the landscape. Sponsors may also be local school districts or another entity that is supposed to monitor the performance within the law. For example, Breakthrough Schools is a nonprofit charter management organization that manages 3 types of schools in the Cleveland area. Its sponsor is the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. The nonprofit must conform to public audit, reporting laws. It has friends organizations, and it helps fiscally as well as with volunteers and advocacy. The student tuition is derived from the Cleveland Metro School District, which is responsible for the oversight and performance.
So they can either be publicly funded and publicly operated, or publicly funded and privately operated.
Right.
And that requires a sponsor and an operator.
Right.
So some entity has to okay the operator to run that system.
And that's the
Yes.
State Board of
Okay.
Education.
The State Board of Education does that?
Right.
And through the community schools section of the Ohio Department of Education, and the school board actually, signs the charter, but the State Board of Education section on community schools deals with all the nitty-gritty and the homework that enables the charters to get put together.
We're going to come back to that just
Yeah.
a little bit. Let me
We
just move forward to talk about how long have charter schools been in Ohio and what led to their development. What was happening in education that made them, you did touch on that a bit with a promise of innovation, but were there trends going on? Were there things happening over 20 years ago when these were brought forward?
They've been in existence for 20 years. Governor Voinovich was the governor at the time that the legislature decided to establish charter school permission, so to speak. And in those 20 years, what they've tried to do is well, let's go back a little bit again. The terminology isn't particularly a problem. And what has happened is that because they're called community public schools, they are supported with public money. However, the framework has not been set up like it was set up for our common public schools in the Constitution through the State Board of Education. And what caused them to happen again was because of low report card scores in especially the urban 8, and they thought innovation might be the answer.
Was it also a time when school choice was starting to see come
Yes.
into, like, vouchers?
Sure.
They went to charter schools.
Sure.
And-
Are the laws, rules, and regulations the same for charters? I think you've been making that point. The charter laws and regulations and rules are different from traditional public schools?
Yeah, some of them are, and in particular, the ones that they have not dealt with the for-profit organizations, and there are a lot of those, particularly related to online e-schools. But some of the other routine schools have not. That if they're privately held, they don't have to do business in the public eye, and that means accountability isn't
And
there.
We're going to talk a little bit more about the
Yeah.
transparency. So if
Yeah.
you look at the laws governing charter schools and the laws governing traditional public schools, and then
Right.
the rules and regulations that follow, there is a big difference between them. Do a quick break.
Depending on who the sponsor is.
Yes.
The sponsorship is key, I believe.
This is Pat Simons for Forum 360, Local Issues with a Global View. With me today are Dr. Mamie Becker and Bev Dorson of the Hudson League of Women Voters, and we're talking about charter schools. There's a couple other things I'd really like to move on to. We know that public education funding is one of the largest items in the state budget. And because we've really never addressed the DeRolf rulings, we are still too heavily reliant on local property taxes. So how are charter schools funded through state and local taxes, and do they get federal funds?
Well, the governor puts forth a budget every other year, a biannual budget, and in this cycle, he has proposed that $6,000 per student will come from the state coffers for all public school students. So keep in mind that our charter students are part of the public school system. The public school systems, our traditional public schools, are charged with the duty to pass through the full amount of that $6,000. However, one of the key sticking points is actually the state only sends us $2,300 in Hudson for each student. So we're making up the $3,700 extra dollars if a Hudson student chooses to go to a different school.
So charter students actually take a combination of state funding and local funding.
Yes.
And then we receive federal funding on top of that.
Yeah.
If there are services that a student needs who leaves the district to attend a charter school, does the local district have to provide those services? What
Yes.
type of services might they provide?
Well, they're required at a minimum to provide transportation, and if there are special testings or other kinds of special services that a student would need, the local school district has to pony up for that as well.
So they take care of their student as if it's their student, but the student would be going to another
The
school.
school.
Now, we've learned through the media that there are some privately operated charter schools. that have engaged in questionable business practices, specifically in finance and falsifying attendance records. The Akron Beacon Journal on March 29th reports that since 2001, 29.3 million tax dollars have been misappropriated, sometimes illegally, by charters. They further report that there are $60 million in overpayments to ECOT, which is the largest charter e-school provider. There is no reference in here about how we might recoup those funds. What is the legislature, is there a part for the auditor or the Federal Department of Education? What are they doing to address these issues?
Well, the state auditor is the office that has taken major responsibility because they're responsible for the fiscal appropriate use of tax dollars across the state. And so the auditor has been trying to recover monies from that 20+ million dollars, 27.
The original was 29.3.
29.3.
We're only able to get 2.5 million back.
2.5 return on that. But in terms of the 60 to 80 million dollars that ECOT has disappeared with, that are also tax dollars, that's a whole nother issue.
Right.
And the only way that could be, the responsibility at this point can be put on the table is through special legislation, which there has been a bill introduced. Well, there's one in the House and there's another one in the Senate that is related, but they've not had hearings, and whether they will have hearings or not is...
You're speaking of House Bill 87.
87 and Senate Bill 37.
A Senate bill as well. Is it,
Yes.
Is it close to House Bill 87 in its
Well,
content?
it's a little bit different in its focus.
When you look at all of these parts and pieces, do you think they've covered all of the loopholes?
Senate Bill 2, which was passed and came into force in 2016, has tried to cover a range of loopholes related to operators and sponsors and reporting. There's some miscellaneous things in terms of the administration overall. But it doesn't cover all the loopholes because they don't deal with the for-profit organizations, and they really don't, any of them, or the current bills that have been introduced, don't deal with the issue of making the local school districts whole, because every time a student moves from a local school district to a charter school, the local school district loses, and the charter schools, probably on the order of 80% from what I've been able to figure out, are producing less good results in terms of educated students than
So
the traditional public schools.
It's fair to say that the law has to continue to evolve. It is
Yes.
not currently, or anything that's pending is not going to cover all these
Yes, and it needs
loopholes.
to be enforced. It's not just the
Has to
evolution
be
of the law.
enforced as well.
Yeah.
The annual state report card is one way for Ohio to communicate its public education status to its citizens. We want to know that our students are being well served and that our money is being spent effectively. Have you had a chance to review these reports, and have charters been shown to bring the innovation that was promised as an alternative to traditional schools?
Well, there are 373 charter schools with 117,000 approximate students right now in the state of Ohio, according to the Ohio Department of Education. In a report from just the end of March, 72.5% of the charter funding went to charters that do not outperform the local district in which they're coming from. They are either at the same or lower levels. That would mean that only 27.5% of our charters outperform traditional public schools.
But there are charters that do well,
Yes.
and those are held up quite frequently.
Yes.
They tend to be the least, a number, but have you found characteristics that make them more high achieving?
Well, this is one of my points about the Cleveland schools that have the breakthrough school, and they have various schools that are geared to needs, and they're overseen completely by an elected board of education.
So there's a big difference
Yes.
by whether or not it's being operated by an elected board
Yeah.
or overseen by a
Right.
private. Do other states have charters?
Yes, they absolutely do. It
All
is,
but 7.
yes, all but
All but
seven.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this is very interesting because it's kind of hard to get to the base of how they're performing overall. But again, just in March of 2015, Alabama was the last to join us. 7 states that do not have charter schools are Kentucky, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, Vermont, and West Virginia.
Are they doing well? Are they successful
The charter schools?
in those states?
Probably no more
Uneven,
than Ohio. And some of them are big.
So we see similarities to what Ohio's
Yes.
issues are. We also see states that we could use as a model
Correct.
for better charter schools. Well, I'm very curious though, what is the league doing to take action on charter schools?
Okay.
Okay, and we've been working on it.
We've been working on it. Well, the first thing we're doing is to get all of the rest of the leagues in the state to agree that this needs priority attention. And then the leagues can foster public education, they can work with local school districts to educate. So the leagues have, but they also, we also can, in a very timely way, lobby at the state level so that things can happen. But before we do that, we have to be sure that we have a framework on which to proceed that tackles a clear purpose that's consistent with constitutionality, management.
So you have
Yeah.
to follow a process.
Yes.
You can bring this action from a grassroots
Correct.
league. You take it to all the leagues. They have to approve it through another process.
Yeah.
And once that's done, then you can go out and take action on it.
Yes.
So if you would take, you had, I believe you had some, your position has 5 principles.
Yes.
Can you name those very quickly?
Yeah. One of it is clear purpose. The other one has management structures that are consistent with public school, traditional public schools. Transparency and accountability with all the checks and balances that traditional public schools and other public entities have. Conflict of interest provisions and facilities and funding.
So if you could line those up against charter schools, could League fully support charter schools? If those were ticked off, if all charter schools met your principles, could you then fully support them?
I believe we could, but again, it's the devil's in the details.
Well, I think
And
it's
sponsorship is one of the major problems.
So you have a guidance. This is your guide whenever you
Yeah.
approach a charter school issue. How might average Ohioans, could they relate to these principles?
I want to make one other caveat quickly, but if the public schools are an essential ingredient in a democratic and form of government, and they are, if they are accountable to elected boards of officials, so they can be accessed by citizens, that would be a major step in the right direction. I don't think I'd be willing to say that the league could support charter schools as a substitute for public schools as the only, because public schools are local, and that's constitutional. So I
you're-
think as an ancillary to fill in unmet needs that public schools find it difficult to address in partnership with public schools. Yes.
It sounds like they're fairly common sense points. And it sounds like if the average citizen would like a guide to determine what goes on in charter schools and how they're being operated, it would be a good guide. Who can the public contact for more information?
Our league website is right here, and it's lwvhudsonohio.org. In addition to that, we hold public programs. Last spring we had a program with 2 superintendents. Our elected school board District 5 member Also, our state representative, 37th District, and also Doug Livingston. We have informational meetings all the time. I think the public has to be alert to newspaper articles. I think they have to be alert to what's going on, but also they need to be active. If they see something that kind of doesn't set right, they can contact without any league support. But we would welcome members. We would welcome them getting in touch with us and learning more about charter schools.
And your local Board of Education meetings are open to the public. They take public input. There's an information at the state level under knowyourcharter.com,
Right.
which is great.
And we are scrolling all of your resources on the program, so I want you to know that is available. It's been a lot of information in a short period of time. I want to thank you so much for coming today. It has been my pleasure to host Bev Dorson and Dr. Mimi Becker in this discussion on League of Women Voters' perspective on Ohio's charter schools. I'm Pat Simons, and this has been Forum 360, local issues with a global view. Thanks for joining us, and have a great day.
Forum 360 is brought to you with support from Electric Impulse Communications, Kim and Harvey Nelson, Rubber City Radio Group, Acronist.com, Hudson Cable, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Forum 360 supporters, and the Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron.